All right. My name is Jason Hasty. I'm the athletic specialist for the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library. We're here with Coach Vince Dooley. This is the third in a series of oral history interviews we'll be doing with him, documenting his life and career at UGA. So today is Tuesday, June 27th, 2017. So thank you for bringing us into your home again, Coach.
Well, I'm happy to see you all here now, and maybe we'll have two more opportunities.
I think that'll be great. So, what I'd like to talk to you about today is the great years that the program went through during the early 1980s. Before we get into that, I want to talk to you about something that isn't of great historical import, but which is certainly an interesting curiosity for the program, and that was the visit by Prince Charles to the game against Kentucky in 1977. How did that visit come about? Why did it come about? Were you involved in the planning of that at all, or how involved were you with that? And how did the team respond to that?
Well, it was a great moment, really, for the university, first of all, and I think more than anything else, Dean Rusk was most responsible. Dean Rusk, the former Secretary of State under President Kennedy and President Johnson, who came and became a member of the law school, and one that was a great supporter, I might add. I always enjoyed visiting with him because when I came away, I really felt like that I had learned something. So this was a great person. But because of his reputation, I think he was able to persuade the prince to come to Athens. He was coming to the U.S. and he was going to visit somewhere, so among other places, and certainly a university would be a good place for him to visit to really get the atmosphere of a football Saturday. So there was a lot of excitement, but also a lot of security issues. I remember them being all the security people walking under the stadium where the Tenure Creek flows and checking out everything. And there was a great deal of excitement. And we had an opportunity to meet the prince before the kickoff. We being Fran Kersey, who was the coach at Kentucky, and myself, and our captains. So I presented the prince with a autographed football. And I don't think that Fran Kersey was prepared to give him anything. But Fran, who loved to chew gum, got in there and opened up a stick of gum and peeled it back and said, "Gum, Prince?" Well, I can still see the expression on the prince's face when he said that. And he said, "Oh, no, no, thank you." But it was a great, I never will forget that expression. But anyway, all of that excitement, and the students were excited about it as well. But our football team wasn't very excited. By that, I mean, we didn't play very well. And so we got beat by Kentucky. So that part of it I'd like to forget, but you can't forget Prince Charles visiting Athens, Georgia, and coming to a football game, and thanks primarily to Dean Rusk and at the time, President Fred Davison.
Around that same time, another kind of, certainly not on the level of Prince Charles, but famous in another area, James Brown became associated with the program. He released a song called Dooley's Junkyard Dogs. How did James Brown become involved in the program, and what was his relation to the program? How did that song come about?
Well, James Brown, who was very popular, I got to know him, and I'm going to have to pause here for a second.
So we were talking about Dooley's Junkyard Dogs, a song that James Brown wrote about you and about the team, and how he became involved with the program. So how did that happen?
Well, James Brown, the godfather of soul, who was from Augusta, Georgia, or East Augusta, came over, somebody invited him to a football game, and so I had an opportunity to meet him. And then there was a fellow named Happy Howard who was involved in the radio, I think still is, and he had the radio contract at Georgia at the time. And so he wrote the lyrics to a song and arranged for James Brown and myself to meet over in Atlanta to record that song, Dooley's Junkyard Dog. Well, James Brown, there was no music to it except for the lyrics. So I can still see James Brown looking at the lyrics, and then he started moving. His legs started moving and his arms started moving, and then the band kind of took up with what he was doing, and just spontaneously the music comes out, and he comes out and he starts singing it because he had the lyrics. And the more he shook, the more the band played. And it was an incredible performance of a true artist. I mean, it was strictly him and his rhythm that performed, that made the music happen. But Happy Howard wrote the lyrics, and it was quite popular. And then he came to some games, and we got to know him well. And he would perform in front of the students and do his splits and everything. And there was a lot of spirit, and I think the students really loved him. And he came to a bowl game. We went down, I think, to Tampa to a bowl game. So he came down there and performed. And I got to know him well, and I really enjoyed that experience. And Dooley's Junkyard Dogs, which was sort of patterned after that '75 team, where the team was named the Junkyard Dogs. And it was great experience. And then we had two back-to-back good seasons in 1975. We ended up beating our three big rivals all in a row, and went to the Cotton Bowl. And then the next year in '76, we won the SEC championship. And the nucleus of that group was these little small fighting junkyard dogs, and that's how we got the name. Coach Russell came to me and asked me, said, "What do you think about naming the defense Junkyard Dogs?" And I remember telling Irk, "I don't care what we call them, I just want them to perform," because we hadn't performed very well the year before, and they did. So we had 2 great years, and James Brown was a big part of that.
That's an interesting aspect of the program that he could prove, and certainly unique that an artist of that stature would provide something like that for us. Kind of moving ahead a little bit, toward the end of the '70s, '79, you had an interesting season. You went 6-5. You lost all but one game against your out-of-conference opponents and won all but one game against your in-conference opponents. But then the next year, you went on to have a little more success in 1980. What was that '79 team like? Was it young guys who then grew up, or was it a case where there was just missing certain elements that you were able to provide through your recruiting?
Well, it was a particular year in which the ACC was stronger than they had ever been during that period of time. And we came very, very close to going to the Sugar Bowl to represent Georgia as the SEC champions, despite the fact that I think we lost 3 or maybe more ACC games. In fact, I used to joke that I was voted ACC Coach of the Year. They liked me so much that particular year. But we ended up strong against Georgia Tech, and I felt like that there was a good nucleus of football players that were coming back, that would be seniors the next year. But what was missing was this missing piece of the puzzle, which was a tailback. And that leads us into Herschel Walker. And the recruitment of him.
How did you go about recruiting Herschel Walker? I know Mike Havin stayed in Wrightsville for quite a long time recruiting him. How did you decide on the strategy to go after this great running back who's from not too far from Athens?
Well, everybody knew him. Every scout in the country knew Herschel. He was a man among boys at that time, particularly in the league that he was in. Wrightsville, Georgia was in the lowest classification, and he might have been the biggest guy on the Wrightsville team. And he was just a one-man show. A lot of people would say in jest that they would line up and the quarterback would get the snap and pitch it to Herschel, and then all the linemen would all stand up and watch Herschel run. So he was so dynamic and so much ahead of everybody that he was regarded and known all over the country. And he was a man among boys. We had him down as a junior, and I remember Willie McClendon, who was doing some good work for us the 78 team at tailback, who had broken Frank Sinkwich's rushing record, and he met Herschel on the sidelines, and as good looking as Willie McClendon was, when you put him next to Herschel, who was his junior in high school, you could see the difference physically, and I remember Willie kind of being awed by him, just a junior in high school. In any event, everybody started recruiting him by the time he was into his sophomore year, all through his junior year, and into his senior year. And Mike Cavan, who was the backfield coach, was the one primarily responsible for recruiting Herschel. So you had limitations as to how many visits you could have with a prospect. I think it was 4 at the time, but there was no limitation as to how long a coach could stay in a town, just kind of be there. And we always said that Coach Cavan took out citizenship in Johnson County, which is the county seat, of course, of Wrightsville, or which is the county of Wrightsville being the county seat. In any event, Mike Cavan stayed there. He absolutely stayed there. We'd come back maybe, I think, on weekends. This was during the off season. Herschel was such an unusual, unique individual, and such a nice fella that the hardest thing Herschel had to do was tell somebody no. And so he liked people that recruited him, and he didn't want to disappoint anybody. He was really had mixed emotions and ended up being the last recruit to sign in the country. And I still remember the incident. I had promised Barbara, my wife, that I would take her and the kids, they were all small, and we'd go up to Boston during the Easter holidays to see her brother, who was in medical school and studying to be an oncologist. So I remember Barbara asking me Wednesday night, what time are we leaving in the morning? And I remember saying, Barbara, I can't go. And you can imagine the response to that. You know, what do you mean you can't go? I said, Herschel has not signed yet. And of course she had a few remarks like, who does Herschel think he is, or whatever. I said, I don't know who he thinks he is, but I can't go. He has not signed. So she took off with the kids, excuse me, and then went to Boston, and they had a great time. So Sunday morning, I was in my office. This was Easter Sunday morning. I'd gone to church, and Steve Greer comes in, our former All-American player and defensive line coach, and he's almost shaking. And I said, Steve, what's wrong? He said, Herschel's ready to sign. Herschel's ready to sign. So we took off and went to Wrightsville. And we couldn't go in because we'd already had the 4 visits. So you couldn't have any contact. So Herschel had to sign by himself inside the house while we stood outside. Now, once he signed, then it was okay to visit with him as many times as you wanted. So that was the recruitment of Herschel. And what Herschel did, he became the missing piece of the puzzle, because Herschel will be the first one to tell you that he had a great supporting cast all around. We had a good senior group. We had a good offensive line of scrimmage. We had some people on defense. All-American Scott Warner, who just went into the Hall of Fame. And I said many times that Scott Warner was the Herschel Walker of the defense of the national championship team. So Herschel, as a freshman, came in, and with this great supporting cast, of course, we had what ended up being the only undefeated, undisputed national championship team in 1980 with a victory in the Sugar Bowl.
What was your assessment of Herschel, as from a coach's perspective, when you looked at the film of him in high school, and certainly when you looked at him in his first practices here at UGA? What did you think about him? Did you think that he would achieve the kind of success that he ultimately did, or did you think that he would do something else, maybe be good but not great? What did you think of Herschel?
I really
as a
thought
freshman?
he was going to be a great player. The only question I had in my mind was how soon was he going to be this great player? Because of coming out of the lowest competition in the state of Georgia. But I was going to give him a chance to see whether he was going to be able to be great early. But I felt like that we had two other tailbacks that had been around. Donnie McMickens, who had been here 5 years and really had worked hard, and I thought deserved the opportunity to start. And then Carney Norris, who had been around a long time, was a pretty good back too as well. So I had a plan that I would let both of those two go 2 rounds, and then Herschel would come in as the third one. So each of them would have 2 series apiece, and then we'll see what happens. Well, by the time Herschel got in, there was no question in the minds of anybody, and the coaches, the players, his teammates, the fans. I said that Herschel might not have known where he was going, but he was going somewhere in a hurry. And of course, he went on and won and scored 2 touchdowns in that ball game, and was a big key in us winning. However, when he first came, I mean, he was so well known. He was sort of a prima donna. Well, he wasn't a prima donna, but he was known, known by everybody, including our team. And we had some pretty good players. But Herschel got here early that day he was supposed to report. There was always a tradition that the freshmen would help the varsity move in. That would be part of their initiation. And Herschel was the first one to grab bags of the varsity and take them up to the room. And I mean, he blended right in, so he gained the respect of the players, his teammates off the field to start with. And then secondly, they were going to see just how great this prima donna that they thought would be. So they were going to welcome him to the University of Georgia varsity football practice. So when we had a little scrimmage there at the end, and so Herschel got the ball, and on the other side of the line there were a couple of big linemen, including Meat Cleaver Weaver. So when Herschel came in, Meat Cleaver hit him, and another one hit him, and I mean they spun him up in the air. And then he came down, but when he got down, as soon as he hit the ground, he jumped up, ran back in the huddle, and lined up ready to go again. In that moment, he gained the respect of all the players on the field, and he had done it off the field by the way he presented himself. And he had this great ability to kind of always say the right thing to the media. And he said that who I wanted to please more than anybody else were my teammates and my coaches. Well, that endured him to his players. And they went to bat for him. They respected him, they loved him, and of course he ended up setting a freshman rushing record and could have won the Heisman Trophy then as a freshman, and then went on and had, of course, a great career of 3 years, and then opt out for circumstances for his 4th year.
You mentioned that you had a strong core of seniors coming back for that 1980 season. Who are some of the key leaders on that team, and how did they really get to that position of being leaders on the team?
Well, because they had been around, we had a lot of seniors, linemen. Tim Morrison, an example, was one of our offensive linemen. Jeff Harper on defense. We had Frank Ross, who was the captain of that team, who had been around. I don't know whether Frank was redshirted or not, but he was around here a long time, and wasn't just a natural gifted player, but nobody was in as good a condition as Frank Ross. And he was an ideal leader and still is today with that team. And Scott Warner, that I mentioned, was really an All-American. And we had Nat Hudson. We had Buck Ballou, who was a quarterback. I mean, we had a lot of good players, and that's just to mention Lindsey Scott. You know, I can go on and on if I had the roster about all the players that we had. So Herschel was the missing piece of the puzzle, but it was a puzzle that was all laid out. These guys were hungry, they were experienced, some of them were very, very talented, the others were old junkyard dogs. They played hard, and they were very unified as a team. So Herschel ended up being that missing piece of the puzzle that made this team what it is today, the only undefeated, undisputed national champions that Georgia's ever had.
One of the kind of key moments, one of the unusual moments before the season, and something that maybe helped to unify the team, was an incident involving a pig.
Oh boy!
How did that? What happened with that?
Well,
what was your response to that? And how do you think that affected the team?
Described it as the Purlong Pig Party, and it got to be a tradition that after the spring practice is over, they would have a final initiation of the freshmen, and they would go to a place called Seagraves and have their party and initiation. And that particular time, they decided that they would barbecue a pig or a hog, but it happened to be the university's hog. So there were 3 or 4 of our top players, both players and leaders, and they confiscated the pig, the hog, and they barbecued him, and then afterwards the skeleton of the pig was dropped out somewhere on campus, and they got the license plate, and the next thing I know, we get a call about the incident. And the fellow that was head of that part of the university, animal science, I guess it was. You can imagine how mad he was, the dean, and I was mad too, really mad. And he called me up, and I'm trying to explain to him that I made the mistake of saying, now these are the 4 or 5 of the best leaders I got on the team. And when I caught myself halfway through, I said, oh, you done got yourself. And I quickly said, now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking we're in a heck of a shape if these guys are 4 or 5 of the best leaders. And he graciously agreed to let me handle the discipline. And also they had to collect the money to pay for it, and paid a pretty good price for that hog. And then I took them off scholarship. There were about 4 or 5 of them. in the summertime and made them work to earn their scholarship. So they worked in the crew and painted the wall around the practice field. And also they would go into school, they would paint the wall at high noon and 1 or 2 o'clock, and then they'd go work out. And then when they got finished, I remember them saying, you know, we're finished, and they're all happy. And I remember saying to them, it needs another coat. And I could still see the look on their face when I told them that, because I was really mad at them. I confined them to the dormitory for a period of time until I got everything straight. So they paid the price in that respect for what they did. And the team had to all chip in to pay for the hog. And I think it was something that maybe unified them. It was certainly a big factor, I think, in the unification of that football team, for them to go through that and then everybody rally behind a bad mistake and a bad judgment that some of them made, and then all of them had to chip in a little bit of the money. And I think that was a big unifying factor in the team, though I don't recommend that as a matter of norm. But in this case, it all fell into place because of, I think, the way we handled it. And those fellows still talk about it. It's quite a legend, and they, in fact, they ended up having some bricks of the wall around the practice field, and they all got one, and they brought it to me, and 4 or 5 of them that were involved, and I wrote on there, it needs another coat. Congratulations. And I signed my name to it. So all is well that ended well, and that ended well, but it certainly wasn't something that I was very proud of in the begin with, but I think we handled it in the right way.
What was your assessment of your team in 1980 coming out of fall training camp? What did you think they would do during that 1980 season? Did you see an undefeated season, or did you think that there would be some roadblocks along the way?
Well, I never have just looked overall at and made any kind of expectations, because you really do get into what is the first game, and then that leads into the second game and leads into the third game. I thought we had a nucleus of a good football team. How fast Herschel was going to come was still undecided before the season. I didn't know. I was going to give him a chance, and he really produced, of course. With the incident that we just talked about, the Prolonged Pig Party, I didn't know what kind of effect that's going to have on the team. So there's just a lot of questions, and you can't dwell on those. What you have to dwell on is get ready for the first game, and then let's see what happens. And fortunately, things fell into place. We won that ball game. Herschel scores 2 touchdowns. He established himself as number 1. But at the same time, Tennessee had driven down to our 5-yard line. We had a 1-point lead. We had to have a big play on defense. And I remember Nate Taylor sticking his head in there and knocking the ball out of the running back. And we recover it. And then we had to punt to him. And we had lost our punter, Malkowitz, so Jim Broadway, punting for the first time, had to come in and kick out of the end zone. And I mean, at that moment, he had, my rear was as tight as it's ever been, because in the previous kick, he sliced it. So here we are, and they'd be right back in position to kick the field goal to win the game. But he booms it out there 57 yards. And then we hold them, and they didn't get into field goal position. So we kept having these little things that were big things that happened. And different people were stepping forward in making plays at a critical time. As an example, in the Clemson game, and Clemson knocked us all over the field. But we beat them, and the guy that was most responsible was Scott Warner, who intercepted a ball and went 99 yards to the 1 yard line, and we scored, and then he returns a punt for a touchdown. Those were the 2 touchdowns. So you can go on and on. We just somehow developed this attitude that this team is going to find a way to win. And it was like that. And we had a tough schedule, a very tough schedule. We played South Carolina, who really was good because they had George Rogers, who was a Heisman Trophy winner. And we had a heck of a game there. Then we had to play Florida right after that ball game. And then we got behind, and with a minute left, and we had Buck Blue to Lindsey Scott. I mean, there's another example of people stepping up that we had to in order for us to win. And it was that way throughout the season and right on up through the ball game with Notre Dame.
Talking about that Florida game for a moment, you mentioned that we got behind late, and Buck Bellew had to obviously threw a pass to Lindsey Scott to win the game. Walk us through your feelings during that last period of the game where we are behind. We are undefeated at this point, but we're behind. What were you thinking when we were backed up on our own goal line? What was your plan to move the ball down the field? Certainly you weren't anticipating a miracle play, but what was the plan at that point?
Well, we were only down by 1 point, but we were back on a 7 yard line, and the first 2 plays didn't go very well, so it was 3rd down, and I'm thinking, if we can just get a first down, get out of this hole, then we can start a drive that can get us close enough to kick the field goal. So when Buck was rushed and had to scramble and then hit Lindsey, and he catches the ball, and I said to myself, we got it. I'm talking about the first down. We got it. And then when he hit the ground and turned and started to run, I thought to myself, man, we may have a little bit more than a first down. And then he started running and actually came up alongside me on the sidelines, and I started running with him and outran him for 10 yards anyway until he passed me, and then he went on in and scored. And then that was bedlam after that. We had everybody ran out on the field. We got a 15-yard penalty because then Florida could come right back down the field and score. So it was just a big play, 97, 98-yard touchdown play, or 92 yards, I mean, touchdown play that I still think today is the biggest single play in Georgia football history. Because not only did it win that game, but it led to what was eventually, again, the only undefeated, undisputed national championship team. And we couldn't have had it without that play.
Certainly that is the biggest play in Georgia sports history. Certainly one of the biggest plays in college football history. At the end of that game, you're undefeated. You're probably thinking, you have a shot at the national title. How do you manage the team at that point so that they don't get ahead of themselves, so that they don't start looking ahead too much to a possible title game? How do you manage their expectations?
I think that the team by then had seen that every game that they're going to compete in, playing good football teams, and we got to find a way to win, which had been the history of that team. And we kind of developed a saying, one more time, just one more time. And so that became the theme as we got into the 8th and 9th football game, we just one more time. So when we got to the last game, the championship game, it was just one more time, one more time. We got to find a way. And they did. I mean, we ended up, it wasn't the prettiest game in the world, but we found a way, and we found a way because Notre Dame fumbled 4 or 5 times. We had that play, what I call the longest onside kick in college football, that the Kelly boys, Steve and Bob, combined to recover, which gave us an easy touchdown. And then we got another fumble that one of our players, I'm trying to think of who it was, that hit their fullback, and he fumbles the ball, and we get it at the 20, and so Herschel scores on a sweep, and so it just, and then Scott Warner, even with that, we had to somehow fight off their quarterback throwing the ball. And 2 or 3 times in the end zone, Scott Warner went up with balls and against a wide receiver and either came down with the interception or was able to knock the ball away. That preserved the victory, 17-10. And then, of course, Herschel. I mean, you could start with Herschel, who on the second play of the game, he dislocates his shoulder. And so here he comes to the sideline with his arm sticking up in the air. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, here we are getting ready to have a national championship, and the best player that we have on the team is coming out with his arm up in the air, his elbow sticking straight up. And so it looked like he was going, but they put the shoulder back in place, and he goes back in the ball game, and against a really good Notre Dame defense, he scored. He rushed for 152 yards, and they have not given up to one back 100 yards a whole season, but he goes for 152 with a dislocated shoulder. So all those things just fell into place for us to do that. And I can still see this lick on that fullback. His name is a defensive guard, Tim Crow. And I told Tim that it's the loudest lick that I've ever heard in a college football game when he hit that fullback. And the fullback, incidentally, is a neurosurgeon in Atlanta and has 2 children that came here and were swimmers on the Georgia football team, on our swimming team rather. And so we're going to meet with him pretty soon and to review the Notre Dame game that's coming up. We're having, I think, an event at the library.
I think in September coming up.
Sometime in September. So it'll be good to see him. And he's so since he's had 2 daughters that finished here, he's got a softer feeling for the university.
Well, I'm glad there's no lasting ill will from that hard hit from Tim Crow.
Yeah.
Regarding Herschel's injury, the dislocated shoulder, how did that affect your game plan for the game? Did you have to adjust it to accommodate his shoulder injury, or
he adjusted himself,
yeah.
And I didn't realize that. He stayed away from his shoulder. Usually he had a great ability to go over the top. I don't think we ever failed to make a first down because he could go over the top, go high, and he'd had such strength that we could always make the first down. And then he would roll, I think, with his left shoulder or right shoulder. But in the Notre Dame game, when he scored going over the top, he told me later when I interviewed him, because I wrote a book called Vince Dooley's Playbook, 34 of Georgia's Most Memorable Plays, and that's one of them. And he told me that normally he comes down on the other shoulder, but that he had to switch shoulders because he couldn't come down on that one. So he adjusted himself.
Okay. You won the national championship, obviously a highlight of any career, certainly a highlight for UGA. But you have a lot coming back for that 1981 season. Did you think you'd be able to repeat? Did you think with back like Herschel Walker you'd be able to repeat? Because you'd also lost a few players, some of the seniors who'd been on that 1980 season. So what was even though you didn't necessarily look ahead to individual games, what did you think the program would look like over the next 2 or 3 years?
Well, again, it's hard to think in terms of a long range. Coaches really do think in terms of a season, and then they quickly get away from that, and you start thinking about the first game. Yes, I knew what we had was firepower. And by that I mean, when you have a quarterback in Buck Bellew, you got a running back in Herschel Walker, and you got a receiver in Lindsey Scott, you got firepower. That means you got an offense that can explode. And defensively, I knew we were going to still be good, but I thought we'd be even better offensively. Even though Herschel did not have the long runs the next 2 years that he did his freshman year, because they had all this time to study him, to know you're not going to tackle Herschel high. You got to go low. So, but he made some of the greatest runs the next 2 years than he ever did as a freshman, because he would absolutely, it may be a 10 or 12-yard run, and he was bouncing off people and twisting and turning and going for it. Some of the other runs, they weren't easy, but they were relatively easy compared to the fact that everybody on that defense was coming after him, and he still was able to run and knock them off and make yardage. And as I say, we never failed to make a first down as long as Herschel was there, and we gave him the football, which I did most every time.
It's a good plan. Worked out. You had a great rivalry with Clemson University at this time. You won the national title in '80. They won it a year later. How do you view these big rivalries from a coach's perspective? Do they require different preparation from the team, or you just buckle down with the kind of things that you normally do?
Well, there's certain rivalries that are big. Georgia has accumulated a lot of rivalries. I mean, the Florida rivalry has always been big. The Auburn, you have to play Auburn. You used to play them after Florida, and usually the championship is riding on it, so that's big. Then you got Georgia Tech, that's your state rival, which has got to be the biggest. And then you acquire playing teams like Clemson and South Carolina, and they are big rivals for Georgia. In each case, Clemson's biggest rival is South Carolina and Georgia. South Carolina is Clemson and Georgia. So you accumulate these other rivals, and Clemson was really good at that time. We had some great, tight, old, hardened, knocking football games against Clemson during that period, late 70s, early 80s. I think it was in '78, Clemson was ranked second in the country, and in a big ball game, we beat them and upset them and Kevin Butler's field goal was part of that. So there's another thing that I failed to mention about that great run we had in the '80s. We had an incredible kicking game. Rex Robinson was the kicker on the national championship team, but for the next 2 or 3 years, we had Kevin Butler, who's the only kicker in the College Football Hall of Fame. So we had great balance in every phase of the game, offense, defense, and the kicking game with those guys. So anyway, I really thought that, we're going to be good, but you want to win them all. But that's hard to do. I mean, it's really hard to do. We did it in '80. Clemson beat us in '81. We fumbled the ball. No, we had a turnover, 9 turnovers. But we were still in the game. That's what was amazing about that game. 9 times we turned the ball over, but we were still in the game and had a chance. But Clemson was really good, and they won the national championship. And then the following year, we opened with them in Athens under the lights, and in a great game of 2 teams that was national champions one year and the following year the other, and we won that ball game. So we had a truly great run during that 4-year period. We were 43-4-1. It was the golden age of Georgia football. Yeah. It was the best record of any team in 4 years in the whole country. And we won a national championship. We won 3 straight SEC championships, and even the 4th year without Herschel. We didn't really have a talented tailback. We had some guys that were good players, but they were not in the classification of Herschel. But even with that, we went down to the last game because we did not lose a conference game for 4 years until the last game, which was against Auburn. And if Herschel had been there, we would have won 4 straight SEC championships. But still, that team ended up beating Texas in the Cotton Bowl without Herschel, and ended up being 4th in the nation. So that 4-year period, 3 years with Herschel and 1 year without, was the best record ever in Georgia's football history, and the best 4-year record in the country during that time.
You mentioned the 83 team was without Herschel. Obviously, he left early to go to the USFL. What was that process like? Did you anticipate that he was going to leave at 3 years, which is certainly unusual at that time for a player to leave early? Or was that something unexpected? How did you react to him leaving early, beyond just the fact that you were losing a key piece of your teams?
Well, I really think Herschel, and I can't speak for him, but if there was some way that he could have worked it out, that he would have come back his senior year. But he flirted, and they got him into a trap, and they closed the door on him because even with all of the discussion that was going on about him signing, he had a press conference and said he was coming back his 4th year, and he was excited about it. But what happened, that what he did, they had spent 3 days with him, pressuring him to sign, and he just, when it came time, he said, I don't want to do this. So they said, well, if you'll sign it, and they brought his attorney, or at least the attorney of the parents, up to try to talk him into it. So he said, they said, if you'll sign it, and if you don't want to do it by 7 o'clock in the next morning, we'll tear it up. And sure enough, at 7 o'clock the next morning, he told them, I want to stay. I don't want to go. And so the owner of that team tore it up, flushed it down the commode. It never happened, except somebody made a copy of it and sent it to the Boston Globe, who ran it, and I was out in Colorado speaking at the time when I heard about it. And so it was, here he was. They had proof that he had signed, even though that he really was, it was a stipulation that if he didn't want to do it by the next morning, it was kind of a conditional signing. Then it was over. And it was sad for a lot of people, a lot of Georgia people, and I think for Herschel, because he would have set a record that nobody, a Russian record that nobody would ever have broken in this day and time. So that happened, and you just pick up the pieces and go. We took Barry Young, who was a fullback, moved him to tailback, and we had a little Tron Jackson, Electron, who had great speed, a little fella. But we didn't have a Herschel. But at the same time, we had a great defense. We had some great people on defense. We had some good offensive people, and we ended up, again, 4th in the nation with a team without Herschel, which gives you the indication of how many good players we had during that period of time other than Herschel.
Certainly you knew that his time was coming to an end. Every player only really gets 4 years. How did you plan to bring in a running back to replace Herschel Walker? Or certainly you can't replace someone of that caliber, but how did you view the succession for him? Did you
Well, it was easy, really, because we by then had gained a reputation of running backs. I mentioned Willie McClendon, who was before Herschel, who had done extremely well. And then Herschel, nobody wanted to come and play behind Herschel, but as soon as he left, I mean, we didn't do it. We had Lars Tate and Rodney Hampton, who played with the Giants. Lars Tate, who was a very fine running back from Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. Georgia had a reputation of running backs, so it wasn't all that difficult to go recruit a running back after Herschel left. Now, while he was here, we weren't able to recruit a running back for 3 years, mm-hmm. and so we came up short after Herschel left.
Kind of going back a little bit and talking about recruiting, you recruited Herschel just several years, 8 or 9 years after the team was integrated. How was it different to recruit a running back or an African American athlete to the team after integration than it was before, even though it was still reasonably close? Did you still have to sell the university, or had integration taken hold to the point where that was not really an issue anymore?
I think it was to the point where it was not an issue any longer. Mm-hmm. And after several years, and you had 8 years of high school integration as well. Well, actually, by then it was 12 or 14 years of integration in the high schools. So by the time that we got around to recruiting that class that Herschel was a freshman in, race was not an issue at all. I mean, it will always be some issue, I guess, with some individuals, but overall, it was not. And we didn't have to deal with that or even bring it up about trying to convince people how they would be treated. I think that the proof was in the pudding, based on the success we had and the fact that we had been integrated then for almost 10 years.
So that process happened fairly quickly.
Yes.
The other thing that happened during the 1980 season, and it happened to you and your family, was you had a car accident right before homecoming. How did that affect you during that season?
Well, it really did affect me for the next game. Mm-hmm. Our son Derek was playing midget football, and we picked him up on a Friday night. He was in the back seat, and we said, let's go and see the decorations for homecoming. Mm. We were playing Vanderbilt, and some fellow ran a red light and hit us, and Barbara had to take a spleen out, and I had a concussion and busted lip. Looked like somebody really punched me. Rocky Marciano, somebody had hit me right in the choppers. So they gave me some kind of pill to kind of relax me or to take away the headache or whatever during the ball game. And I'd have to admit that it was kind of a floating pill. I don't know what it was, but I was kind of floating on the sidelines. And Herschel, it was good that Herschel had one of the greatest games he ever had was against Vanderbilt. So that was not an issue. But I do remember Dick Copas, who was our get-back coach. Dick was a very successful golf coach, and he was an academic counselor. And he was also the get-back coach. In other words, we had him assigned to anybody that got too far out, you pull them back, including me to start with. And he was constantly kind of guiding me because I was kind of floating along on the sidelines. And it was easy because Herschel was having a great day. So we got by that trauma, though Barbara later on had a spleen removed, and she ended up being a lot worse than I was. And Derek had his football uniform on, so he didn't get hurt at all. So it worked out good.
One other thing that kind of happened during this time period is you considered moving to Auburn University, taking a job offer from Auburn to coach their head football team. What was your thinking behind this? What was the offer like? How serious was the was the offer?
Well, I was here coaching 25 years, and there were only 2 times that I had ever considered. One was Oklahoma, because I had such great respect for Bud Wilkinson. That was after my 2nd year when we all had a great start. And I'd always admired Bud Wilkinson and studied him. And he called me up and suggested that I go out and take a look. I wasn't even going. So I did go to Oklahoma to look, and but in the final analysis, everybody was so great about wanting me to stay at Georgia, and we had just gotten started, and I felt like we had an opportunity to have a good team, which we did. We won the championship the next year. So I never wanted to consider any other offer, though I really had people contact me, but I didn't want my name out every time a job opening took place. So I just, unless I was really serious. Well, Auburn came. Well, Auburn's my alma mater. The governor of the state at the time was my roommate in college. And then there was some emotional appeal, obviously, with that, and also with Barbara, who went to Auburn as well. And in the final analysis, that I had just been at Georgia too long. I was been here 17 years. I had 17 years of players. And besides that, all of my children grew up. When we went out to the airport for me to fly over to visit about the job with Auburn, Derek, who was just a kid at the time, he was crying. He says, "I hate Auburn." And well, at that age, you know, it's either love or hate. So I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, all of my kids, that's all they've ever known is Georgia. So that plus all these players that I had, that my roots were more recent and were deeper at Georgia than they were at Auburn. Maybe if they had come, maybe if I'd had the offer after 5 years, I might have gone back to Auburn. But I was here too long. I had deeper roots, and the final analysis, this was home for me.
One other thing that happened during this time period is after the '80 season, your longtime defensive coordinator, Herc Russell, left to restart the program start the program at Georgia Southern. How did you go about replacing Herc Russell? Obviously, you brought in Bill Lewis to replace him as defensive coordinator, but how do you reconfigure your staff after losing a longtime assistant like that?
Well, it's difficult because Herc was with me 17 years. We were together a long period of time. We were actually together at Auburn. We coached together at Auburn. And they did a great job of recruiting him. I think Herc was kind of on the verge of jobs, but this was in the state. This was a chance for him. And he did an incredible job at Georgia Southern. I mean, incredible, which I was not surprised. But I always felt like that the athletic director, Bucky Wagner, and the president did a great job of recruiting him because they didn't have a program. They didn't even have a football, and they had the press conferences, I understand it. But he ends up winning 3 national championships and does a great job. But I don't know, the players rallied. I think they wanted to show that they respected Coach Russell, and that he wasn't here any longer, but they were going to play. And then after he left, you know, we had those 3 great years. We had 81, 82, and 83, and our defense by then had just gotten stronger and stronger. So they were played with great intensity. And part of it was the pride that they had played for Coach Russell. Well, Bill Lewis came in, and he was the defensive coordinator, and he did a good job. We had a good defensive staff. Dale Strom and others on our staff were really a solid group. So we missed Herc, there's no question about that. But at the same time, we kept winning championships, SEC championships, without Herc.
Kind of looking at recruiting during this time period, not necessarily our recruiting, but certainly there was a lot of corruption in recruiting at this time. certainly leading up to SMU getting the death penalty later in the decade. How did you respond to some of what you were probably seeing out on the recruiting trail in terms of things that schools were doing inappropriately? Did you stay away from players that were being recruited with dirty tactics, or did you try to go after them legitimately?
Well, you never know what's going on with players. You get awfully suspicious when one is committed to you.
And you don't have to name names, by the way.
And I won't name names, but the fact that they are committed and are coming, and then all of a sudden the last 2 days they change their mind. You get suspicious. And it proved that in some cases we did lose some players because of that. And I used to always get kind of upset during recruiting period because I don't know why, I was just an illogical thinking that when a player would tell me that they are going to go somewhere else, I used to think to myself, well, how could you be that dumb? I mean, we got a great program here, we got great facilities, and why would you want to go somewhere else? But at the same time, logically, you couldn't sign everybody that you recruited. It would be impossible. But I always hated to lose a player, just like I hated to lose a football game. But nevertheless, we had our bouts with the NCAA. There was never in the whole time that I was here that was there any kind of evidence of a whole-scale recruiting thing. We had some violations. We had a couple of alumni that did some things they shouldn't have done. But overall, we never was put on any kind of serious probation. And most of it was secondary. And for instance, the big difference was if you were put on probation, which we were you put on probation where you couldn't go to a bowl game. The whole time that we ever had a bout with the NCAA and a probation that was administered to us did not include a bowl game. So it was not major in that respect because that was the cutoff. A bowl game or television. If you got slapped with that, it was big. So, and I think that it was always challenging. There was a lot of other talk. You never knew what was going on, but eventually some schools got a pretty good penalty as a result of some of the violations in the conference. And it justified the fact that we lost a few players because of that.
How was the conference changing at this point? You had some of the older guard coaches, such as Bear Bryant, who retired, and sadly Bear passed away right after he retired, and new coaches coming in like Pat Dye at Auburn. How was the conference landscape changing? Was that something you were cognizant of, or was it just simply we're playing our games and the rest of the conference kind of does what it does?
Well, I was a young fellow when I came. I was 31 years old, and Bear Bryant was the coach at Alabama, and Johnny Vaught was the coach at Ole Miss, who was one of the great coaches in this league, and Charlie McClendon was down at LSU, and we had Ray Graves at Florida, you had Coach Bobby Dodd at Georgia Tech, and they were in the conference. So all of these fellows began to all of a sudden retire, and then all of a sudden I got older, and I ended up being the dean of coaches in the conference. It's amazing how that can happen over a shorter period of time. But I was fortunate to be here during a period of time when there was a big turnover in schools. For instance, there were 5 Georgia Tech coaches. There were 5 South Carolina coaches. There were 5 Clemson coaches. There were 3 coaches at Alabama. There were 5 Mississippi State and Ole Miss coaches, and 3 or 4 at Tennessee, and the same way at Florida, 4 or 5. And I was able to survive and become the dean of the conference. And the reason is that we were successful. And had we not been successful, I probably would have been among the others that just went away. But I always took pride in that, is the fact that I was here 25 years and survived some crises, both on the field and off the field, and then overall was here 40 years, both as coach and as athletic director.
And talking certainly about your time as dean of SEC coaches, there came a point when you had to consider how long your tenure was going to be here. What was your thought process leading up to your retirement at the end of the '88 season? Did you want to retire at that point and focus solely on athletic director, or did you figure that you had accomplished all that you could or wanted to accomplish with the program, wanted to turn it over to someone else?
I think that I really had done everything that I wanted to do as a coach. And I didn't want to be a person that did not leave on its own accord. I wanted to step away from coaching without somebody telling me to step away from coaching. So I did it on my own. I did everything I wanted to do. I really thought about the possibilities of running for office. I've always had an interest in politics and history. Did a lot of my history work on political events, and then I always wondered if I could be of service or really be a leader. And I was convinced I could, but I've always said this, that even though I thought about it seriously, that I never felt like it in my heart. In my head, I wanted to do it, but you've got to be totally committed in your heart and in your gut if you're going to do that. And I never did. I was totally committed in my heart and my gut as a coach in athletics, but even though I had a great interest in politics, I still do. I keep up with it, but I wasn't totally committed to it in my heart and my gut. And I listened to my heart and my gut and decided that I'm going to stay as the athletic director. And Chuck Knapp, who was the president at the time, had started a search, and he called the search off immediately when I asked if there's a possibility I could come back. And he said, absolutely. So I guess I went out and explored that to make sure that that this is what I wanted to do. And I had another 15 years as athletic director. I enjoyed being around the university. I enjoyed the fact that we built an overall program, and I enjoyed all my time at Georgia at one place, 40 years here, 25 as a coach, 25 as an athletic director, and then, of course, the mathematicians say that's 50, but I did both jobs for 10 years, and we had some of the greatest success we ever had during that 10-year period, but I stayed on an additional 15 years just solely as the athletic director. So I'm proud of the fact that we were at one school, a great institution, to see it grow like it did, to be and serve under 5 presidents, and then to have all of my children either going their undergraduate or, in the case of Derek, his law degree from Georgia. They all went to Georgia. And to basically be at the same address, not the same house, the same address, 755 Billett Circle, for 54 years. So it's been a great experience to raise a family and live in one wonderful community, a wonderful town like Athens, and a wonderful university like the University of Georgia.
So looking at that last year that you had, did you know going into that year that you wanted to retire, or was that something you thought about and decided on as that particular season progressed?
I think I thought about it toward the end. We wanted to win another championship. We came that close, but didn't. And I don't know. It was. I think that I had, after 25 years, have done everything I wanted to do, and I really got a little tired of the complaints, because nobody's ever happy. They never will be, and there's always something like, you know, you need another coach here, you need to change coaches there, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's, and after 25 years, you get a little tired of it. And maybe if I had not done all that I wanted to do, I wouldn't have been so tired of it. But by that time I was, and I was thinking about, seriously about going into politics. So it was really time for me to step aside. And I did.
How involved were you with the process of finding your replacement, or were you involved with that at all?
I had recommended Eric Russell, and I don't think that that was as well received as I thought it ought to be.
How so?
Well, I'm not sure that the administration at the time thought it was a good idea, and I don't think that that Irk was really recruited like he should have been, and I think that the administration had somebody else in mind. Dick Sheridan was a very good coach, so I don't think that the heart of the administration was into recruiting Irk to come. You had to recruit somebody like that because he did so well down at Georgia Southern. But I recommended him, and he just wasn't recruited hard, and he decided he was going to stay. And then there was some flap about whether he was offered the job or not, which was, I thought, a mistake as well. But nevertheless, I did talk to Dick Sheridan, who was then at North Carolina State, but he was going to a bowl game, and they wanted him to come now. And he was in a dilemma because he really liked the opportunity. I talked to him on the phone. I was not a lead person in recruiting him. I was not on the, quote, search committee, but I was just a consultant. And they felt like they had to have a coach right away. So they wasn't going to wait for Dick Sheridan to finish the bowl game before they hired a coach. And then there was a big move among the alumni for Ray Goff, which was understanding. Ray was very popular, was a great player here, and a very fine football coach. And he was a Georgia boy. We haven't had a Georgia boy in a while. And so he was popular among the alumni, and an excellent recruiter. And I remember Bill Hartman talking to me when we were down at the Gator Bowl, which was my last game, about Ray, that they wanted to go with him and what I thought. And I said, well, I think Ray's fine if he's given an opportunity. He's young like I was. But again, I didn't hire Ray because I wasn't even coaching. I had stepped aside as the athletic director at the end of the year, and so I wasn't in a position to offer the job. But I think that they offered him the job primarily because of his popularity, the fact that the alumni had talked to the administration and felt like that was the way to go after Dick Sheridan had decided not to come right away, that he had to have commitments to go to a bowl game. And that was a decision by the administration.
How does it feel to see one of your former players, someone you recruited and groomed, how does it feel to see him move into that role that you had occupied?
Well, I was very pleased when that decision was made, somebody that played for me. And then I stayed on as athletic director and was with Ray. It's a little difficult to follow somebody that's been successful, and I overall was successful. So he was in a kind of a tough position in that respect. And then I had to make the difficult decision to make a change. And that was really hard because I knew his parents so well and knew Ray. And then I finally had to ask myself, are you going to be an athletic director? Are you going to sit in this chair and make decisions that are tough? And if you can't make them, then you ought to just get out of the chair. So I felt like it was the right decision to make a change. And I decided that I wanted to be the athletic director, but this was the big challenge to be able to make a change with someone that you had recruited, that had played for you, that was the SEC Player of the Year, had coached for me, and had been the head coach at Georgia, and to make the change. I probably kept Ray a year later than most of the alumni. They were ready for a change. There was a big movement to make a change the year before I did make the change. But I felt that I should give Ray another year. Being a coach, I know sometimes it takes another year. And so I granted him another year and made a statement that there should be significant improvement. But I didn't see that. And after the patience of giving me another year, I felt like it was time for a change.
As head coach and certainly as athletic director, how do you deal with alumni? Is that a different relationship? Do you take their input to heart? Do you listen to what they say? Do you discount it? How do you deal with the alumni of the school when they come to you and say, you should be doing this, that, or the other differently?
Well, I think you just listen. I never got into any kind of dispute with any of them. I just listened to them. But in the final analysis, you make your own decision. You can certainly listen, and you can weigh. I mean, that's not only a person physically coming, but in the way of letters, you can tell what people are thinking out there in the way of, we didn't have a lot of emails in those days, but we had a lot of letters, and I got a lot of letters and a lot of suggestions over a period of time. But in the final analysis, you got to make your own decision as a head coach. It's not that you don't listen, and I certainly would listen, and they tried to answer every letter that I ever got, regardless of how critical it was. But still, you think about it, and you got to make the decision. And I was able to do that.
Christian, how much time do we have?
We're at an hour 18.
Hour 18.
What is it?
We're an hour 18. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think we better wrap it up.
Well, Coach, is there anything else you'd like to add for this session? I think we're right at the end of our time here. So is there something else you'd like to add before we cut it off before the next one?
No, I think we've plowed some ground, a lot of ground, and maybe still have some left to plow.
I think so.
So, as always, enjoy the session.
Well, thank you for doing this, Coach. We're looking forward to doing a couple more with you, learning a bit more about your time here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.